So I will begin now by turning the podium to Michael, I think, or Saul. Do you start?
Okay, I'll start. What a pleasure to be here in anarchistic Berkeley, where we make up things on the spot. I think your new chancellor had an education in this regard at a young age as an undergraduate at Wesleyan University, and we are very proud of his accomplishments, and Wesleyan wishes you well. And for me personally, it's great to be back in the Berkeley area. I lived here for some time and have great affection for this extraordinary university. So it's an honor to be part of these festivities and these conversations today. I'm going to be brief as per my instructions and talk a little bit about undergraduate education with an eye to some of the public discourse about undergraduate education that gives one the feeling, especially if you're a professor in the humanities or in the interpretive social sciences, that there's a real crisis afoot and that undergraduate education, to quote the people who are selling business books, is going to be radically disrupted or disintermediated. These are buzzwords that serve people who are teaching traditional business courses still very well in their marketing efforts. Whether there is such a crisis in undergraduate education or in liberal education, to me, is very unclear. For the last couple of years, I've been writing a little book called Beyond the University: Why Liberal Education Matters, and it has become clear to me that discussions of crisis about undergraduate education, and especially about liberal education in the United States, go back to the founding of this country. And almost every generation experiences what this generation thinks is a new problem, which is the tension between the practical and the liberal, the tension between the vocational and the broad contextual education. And you could see this when Thomas Jefferson is arguing against Harvard's method of tracking people into disciplines as soon as they sign up for school, based on what the fathers of their sons thought they should do. Jefferson wanted to go in a completely different direction. And you can see it in Ben Franklin's complaints about effete education that only taught people how to exit a drawing room properly, and taught them nothing useful at all, Franklin said. But Franklin, of course, was not just interested in narrow instrumental education. He was interested in an education that would convey a spirit of experimentation. That's true whether you're in the sciences or the social sciences or the humanities or the arts. A spirit of education. A spirit of experimentation that you get through education, a spirit of experimentation. And I do think the critiques of higher education that we hear, and it's probably no accident, most of it coming from Silicon Valley and Stanford, those critiques are really about trying to make education more a production of conformity than a spirit of experimentation. And that has been true for 200 years in the United States. The defenders of liberal education have been those who see education as a way of resisting conformity. And those, especially today, who would substitute manic monetization for broad contextual learning, they see education as a way of insisting on conformity as a technique for making America more competitive. They are politically retrograde, and they are economically actually impoverished in their thinking, because conformity will not make the United States more competitive economically. So at the beginning of this story in the United States, or near the beginning of the story in the United States, I just want to mention two terms, autonomy and enthusiasm. Autonomy and enthusiasm, which I think still are essential in undergraduate education. Whatever you're taking, whether it's astrophysics or philosophy in the movies or the history of political theory, whatever you're taking from the Jeffersonian perspective at the early 1900s, the early 19th century, from that Jeffersonian perspective, whatever you're taking should make you more autonomous, more capable of making your own decisions. more capable of resisting tyranny, actually, more capable of resisting the powers of authority. And so undergraduate education should be the place where you become the person capable of giving yourself your own rules, making your own decisions, becoming autonomous. The other term I take from the early days of American education comes from Emerson, and it's very different from Jefferson. Jefferson's view, inconsistently applied, of course, hypocritically applied, of course. Jefferson's view was that education in college, education in university, should make you more capable of choice and of resisting tyranny. Emerson said, that's not enough. Education should enhance your capacity for enthusiasm, for being passionate about the world around you, for enlivening the world around you. You know, Emerson said, what the task of a college is not to drill into you skills that you can then market to someone else. The task of a college is to set your soul aflame, to study whether it's the penal colony or whether it's scientific experimentation, to give you a sense of invigoration that you then translate into making the world more alive around you. So autonomy and enthusiasm, two terms from the early 19th century that were applied to liberal education in the United States. From the end of that century, I want to mention two other terms which I think remain important for us. And the first is cooperation, and the second is empowerment. Because neither Jefferson nor Emerson really thought too much about how education developed skills or capacities for cooperation. And Jane Addams did think about that. As the 19th century became the 20th century, Jane Addams was very interested in how a certain kind of education makes you very good at being critical of things, right? Makes you very good at seeing through hypocrisy or seeing through lies or just turning your nose up at popular culture. A certain kind of education does that. But what that education reduces in a person is that person's ability for empathy, that person's what she called sympathetic imagination. And what Addams wanted to see happen in educational venues was the cultivation of the sympathetic imagination as a complement to autonomy and enthusiasm, so that people in their educational endeavors would not just learn to be standing on their own 2 feet or isolated individuals, which Dewey would call a particular psychopathology. Jane Addams said, what she wanted education to do was to make us see the world from someone else's point of view, so that we are engaged in helping those people most vulnerable, helping those people who are most likely to be suffering around us. Education then has a social purpose, that is not just about individual enthusiasm or empowerment. Individual enthusiasm or autonomy. The next word I want to talk about briefly is empowerment. Because around the same time that Jane Addams is doing her work in the late 1800s and early 1900s, Du Bois, W.E.B. Du Bois, is coming into his own as an educator, and he is eager to see that education is not going to be reduced to vocationalism. His big debate with Booker T. Washington was precisely about this. He knew that if education was reduced to instrumental learning, that would result in conformity. And what Du Bois wanted, especially for freed slaves and their descendants, what Du Bois wanted for Africans and African Americans was that education be linked to empowerment. That you understood through education, through cooperation, enthusiasm, and autonomy, that you understood that you could have more power to change the world. And in today's context, education as empowerment becomes education as giving our students the ability to resist conformity, the ability to incite change, the ability to create a culture of innovation and experimentation, not a culture of duplicity and conformity. Undergraduate education, I think it's very clear, can produce duplicity and conformity. Under the guise of learning, you learn how only to participate in power structures that you will not affirm as legitimate, but you will profit from. Or education, as it has done for so long at Berkeley, and I'd like to think at Wesleyan, education can produce a mode of thinking that gives students the ability to resist conformity as they draw on resources from the past to instigate change and innovation.